Delighted to have a great panel. On my far left, we have Philippe Fragniere from Exklusiv Aviation, specialist in charter. Next to him, Devilliers from Dassault, Glen from Synergy, Patrick Margetson-Rushmore, Luxaviation UK, and Aoife Sullivan from the air law firm and the BBGA, the British and Business General Aviation Association, which is now split from EBAA, 11 o'clock last Friday. And we'll never, but nothing happens for a year, and then we'll see what happens. Great, so, pleasure. The last panel, I think, was great. We saw a lot of, although the last two panels were great, but we saw, in the environment, we looked at the ways people can use sustainable fuel, people can use offsetting. Patrick, as an operator, are you worried about the environment and environmental pressures?
I'm worried personally, and also I think as an industry we are worried. I mean, it is an issue that's grown week by week, and it's something that we actually have to address, and I think we are starting to address it. The Labour Party made a statement about business aviation and taxing it. I think when a politician makes a comment, it's really just a soundbite. They're looking for a marketing tool that allows them to attract a certain clientele to vote for them at an election. So that's the rich versus the poor. And I think Labour probably had no intention whatsoever of actually implementing their policy that we're talking about, because they're fully aware of the number of people that are employed within our industry and also the contribution to the GDP that it actually makes.
Aoife, do you think people actually realise how many people are employed in business aviation? No,
not at all. And it is something we are addressing at BBGA with EBAA, our friends in Europe. It's something that it comes up again and again, whether you're dealing with journalists talking about the latest incident in business aviation, or you're talking to HMRC or any of the BAT offices. There is a general perception that we are flying fat cats around. And I don't think we do enough, frankly. I really don't think we do enough to combat that at all levels, you know, from the OEMs to the industry bodies to everybody, even, to be honest, in this room. Because until you start addressing it and until you actually meet hard fact with hard fact, it's just going to carry on. And it's an easy industry to take a pop at. You know, you know, these are all very rich people. They should all pay their taxes. Well, guess what? They do. You know, you only have to look at the tax list and look at the list of owners to verify that.
And do you think the perception is always going to be negative towards business aviation?
Well, yes. I mean, it's not the first time that business aviation is being attacked. I think it's an industry that has been attacked. 10 years ago, it was the big three going down to Washington, D.C. to ask for bailout money. And that was also a strong, very strong public response to that. So I think it will always be attacked. However, I think we have been maybe laying low a little bit too much in terms of how we communicate about this. As an OEM, for instance, of course, it's about how efficient your aircraft is and all of this, but I think now we also need to communicate, and I think it was touched on a little bit before, is the whole phase of this industry, meaning from the production line and how OEMs works on making it greener and greener, to the operation of the aircraft, to what we do with the aircraft afterwards, because I think this is going to be a next issue, is what we do with all these aircraft. They're going to have to be retired. So I think it's going to be an industry issue, and I think each OEM also have to do their own work and work on that issue.
Glen, you came into aviation through flying, and you loved planes, and you wanted to be a pilot, and sometimes you still love the industry. Do you find it hard to understand the anger that people have towards business aviation?
Yeah, I do, and I think a lot of the bad press that aviation gets, certainly currently, you know, the world has gone a bit mad, and the way it's gone a bit mad is, who would have thought Trump would have become president? Who would have thought that Brexit would have happened? And why do people hate aviation? And fundamentally, it's communication. The fact that somebody can take a picture on their mobile telephone, which 15, 20 years ago you'd think would be impossible, And that can be spread worldwide to say, look at this environmentalist who has flown to a meeting in Washington in a private jet. Why did he do that when he's trying to save the rainforest? And actually, that sort of thing's probably been happening all the time, but there wasn't a negative reaction to it because people didn't know about it. So I think that the connection and the connectivity that we all enjoy so much in our life does play a part in making effectively negative data accessible to people.
Philippe, you're always on TikTok and Twitter, and do you feel the industry is being attacked more now?
I think it's now 26 years I do this, so it was already the case 26 years ago. The difference is there are a lot more aircraft than before, there are a lot more clients, a lot more movement, and the issues have changed than 26 years ago. But generally, even at national level, if you think like a country like Switzerland, you have over 20,000 people working in business aviation. I don't think many more people work in the watch industry. And this is something that seems to be still unknown. Yeah, I agree with everyone in the sense it's very easy to go in pinpointing, oh, this is not good, what they're doing, this and that. We're very active in places like Africa. I have never seen so many requests as now to go to impossible place to reach because business needs to be conducted. Or it's never been so much on demand for safety reason because passenger needs to go from A to B without any stop anywhere. So it's a necessary tool, of course, but there are many, many things we can improve on medium term, as discussed before.
I mean, I think why there's an increasing focus on private aviation is that there's more of a divergence between the rich and poor. If you actually look at the number in the UK alone on the rich list that comes out every year, the value of the wealth compared to what the average person or family household has is very, very large. And I think the envy factor just increases. And so when a politician starts to get involved or a journalist starts to get involved, it sort of stokes up should they really be doing this? I mean, I think somebody said to me earlier on today, they said, surely we should be pointing out that agriculture is 17%, land is 15%, cars and vans are 8% of carbon emissions, and we're only 0.04%. And the problem with that is, if you try, it's an issue for everybody, whether it's our business sector or another. And I think one can only bring up the other business sectors and being targeted in a non-aggressive manner. And that's quite a difficult thing to do when you're talking to journalists. I mean, the reality is what the government should be looking at America and China and targeting the amount of emissions that they produce. They are the two biggest polluters geographically in the world. And there are even cars and vans. Will people stop going to work in a car? I mean, if people start to realize that actually they are contributing towards the carbon emission globally, not per passenger, but as a percentage in terms of the total global emissions, if we want to change it, we have to change the way we actually use transport and contribute towards the carbon environment.
I think a lot of it as well is it depends on what you're talking about. But, what we tend to suffer from as an industry is, let's just all keep quiet. Let's just keep out of the papers. Let's just not address these issues because, God forbid, we'd pull the journalists on top of us in terms of the negative publicity. But it's actually very counterproductive because by not addressing it, I mean, I had a journalist ring around the time of the Paradise Papers, and her opening sentence was, how do you feel about helping the rich get richer? And I said, do you want to start again? Hello, my name's Aoife, how are you? And it was, this very aggressive, anti-rich, anti-capitalist stance of what is actually a capitalist newspaper. And I talked it down through with her, and she was like, they're all avoiding their taxes. And I said, you're categorically wrong. You're absolutely wrong, as has been proven since the investigation. Do you claim personal allowances? Well, yes, I do. It's the same thing. These people employ thousands and thousands of people. They build businesses. They develop emerging markets. They create jobs for the likes of you. What is wrong with you? And I think that's what's wrong, is we're not kicking back hard enough. Same with the carbon emissions. We're not kicking back hard enough with proper information that's not based on, one rich person bought a very, very expensive jet and flies around on his own, which seems to be what they all think.
Can kickback? Can a small, business aviation employs, millions of people, creates a lot for GDP, but can it actually capture the imagination of people who will never fly?
Absolutely, because if you start, and this is kind of what I want to do with BBGA, is look at the pilot shortage. We have a pilot shortage. It is going to compound into a massive industry issue in the next 10 years. Why are the pilots not interested in aviation? This is a great career. It's a very highly technical career. Why are they not coming in? Well, they're all terrified. And there's this pervasive, amongst the youth of, well, we need to be doing something to save the planet. And God forbid I should go and learn how to fly a jet. It's not one without the other. You can still contribute to helping the planet and become a pilot. So it's starting at kind of ground zero and just working up and just going back with hard facts of, guys, if they don't fly and if they don't do these 6 meetings in one day, they will not have the businesses and you won't have your job and your family won't have jobs. So I think the problem is we don't go hard enough down that line. We tend to get scared of, they're going to start asking about that one guy who does go around with his dog. And, and there are stories like that. But, they are a minute percentage. They really are.
Yeah. I think we have to accept that for coming next year, 2 years, maybe 5 years, it's going to be a slow slog. We have to put our head above the parapet and accept that actually we're going to be knocked back 9 times out of 10, if not more. But eventually things will change. There will be alternative fuels. There will be electrical vertical takeoff landing machines available for shorter trips into country, maybe into city. And that will take them I know they can't fly at the moment for more than, say, 30, 40 minutes. But as soon as there's the technology that allows them to fly for an hour to an hour and a half, we'll see a lot of the smaller business jets perhaps being replaced by eVTOLs. And we'll see a sea of change. And I think we have to slowly but surely let people know that we believe the environment's an issue. We need to contribute what we are contributing, and also tacking on at the end to say that other industry sectors need to do the same, and the government should be helping out as well.
The issue with that, though, there is so much misinformation around. And as a good example, I know you've got a fantastic thing you can press buttons. Can I just have a show of hands? If electric cars were the same price as your current car, i.e. next time you change your car, you get an electric one instead of a petrol one, put your hand up if you go electric. That's pretty much everybody. And the downside is if everybody in the UK changed their car to electricity, we don't generate enough electricity in the UK to charge all your cars. And it's the same with the eVTOLs. People think it's the golden bullet, it's going to solve all the problems. Unfortunately, it hasn't yet been fully proved that the problem is carbon emissions. Now, I care for the environment as much as anybody else does, and it doesn't mean that I don't think there is an issue. But I think there's a lot of disinformation forcing the industry in a certain direction that may not be the direction it needs to go in. The way that we generate power and the safety of aircraft probably is far more important. And I think that by people believing that that is the issue, and in fact that isn't necessarily the issue, causes a problem. And again, the fact that people don't necessarily correlate the fact that they work for company A, which is owned by company B, which has investment from company C, and company C flies a private jet, and yet they're going to vote for perhaps a political movement that would stop the flying of private jets. The reality hasn't quite set in, and that's what pays their mortgage. So it's a difficult one.
Anne, what do you think? Do you think the industry can spin?
Well, again, as I mentioned, I think communication is going to be key because we keep on talking about we only represent 0.04% of all carbon emission. Not that it doesn't matter and that, of course, need to be spread, but I think we really have a perception issue. It's not a question of... So now we have to, as Aoife mentioned, work with facts, be very clear on what we do and what does that represent. We also have to work really on what the next technology are going to be and how we, instead of just being attacked, how we lead into being greener and greener, in the future. So I think it's going to be an issue that's going to, be recurrent. But instead of always being attacked, I think we should be more forefront about here is what we're doing, here is what we see we're going to do in 10 years, and have a clear plan as an industry and also, again, as an OEM of what are the next steps to give people, okay, they have a plan in mind of what they can implement in the near future.
Philippe?
I don't know, I heard about carbon offset and transparency came several times this morning conversation. I wonder how long it's going to take, like in cars, that the client's going to come forward and say, can you let me know what is the pollution level of my trip or my plane, or things might go in a direction that the regulator or the consumer will come forward and say, okay, can you give me some numbers? And then I guess the pictures will be very clear.
Okay, so the message is the industry needs to spin the business jet story better. Couldn't this be far more counterproductive, given the sophistication of critics?
I think the word spin came from you, Alasdair, nobody else. Spin implies manipulation, and I don't think we need to manipulate. We need to acknowledge and accept there's an issue, say what we are doing in the short term, which is the purchasing of the carbon credits, and looking forward to the next. eVTOLs may only be 10, 15 years down the line, but that's quite a comparatively short time scale, and that is, again, a contributing factor. We need to sort of talk about what the OEMs are doing and what other initiatives are, and saying that within the context of the overall carbon environmental issue, that every business sector needs to contribute to reducing their carbon footprint, and every individual, every household.
I think there's also, isn't there a point here? We're not talking about spin, genuinely not talking about spin. We're talking about owning this industry. Who is better to talk about corporate aviation than the people in this room? We know what this industry, the problem is we talk to ourselves. We don't talk to the people who need to pass the message on. That there is a risk that we all get caught up in discussions on how we're all going to save the planet. And like Hamish and Terry Virts, here was a fantastic presentation on innovation. It's inspiring the youth ahead. And all of the questions were on, yeah, but you were in a G650 going around the world. Well, yes, he was. He was breaking world records. Or the follow-on being, how many of you would stop flying? And most of the panel said, well, we would slow down on the flights. Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about this is a topic that is taking over our industry? And we need to analyse it and meet it with hard fact.
I think the key message is that people outside this room are not as mean and cynical as the people inside this room asking the questions. Glen, pilot shortage, Aoife mentioned it. You have a flight training school. Are you seeing a shortage of people wanting to learn to fly now?
Not wanting to learn to fly for pleasure, and interestingly, no one ever talks about the carbon emissions of our little flight training airplanes, which is fine. But there is a huge shortage in people waking up as children wanting to be a grown-up. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a pilot, a doctor, a train driver, that sort of mentality. One of the main reasons there's a shortage of pilots is there is a greater demand for pilots. So even if the same number of families were financially capable to pay for one of their children to become a pilot, actually we need more than we've ever needed before. There are more aircraft in the sky. But the barrier to become a pilot is just a huge financial burden. And the fact, certainly in the UK, and I know many other European countries, you have to pay VAT on that training, does cause problems. Unless it's addressed, there are going to be problems, and we've all spoken about sort of entry-level, say $3 to $5 million business jets not being able to fly because they haven't got crew. That then knocks onto sales because Nana says, "Hang on, my monthly repayments, if I pay a certain amount of cash, a certain amount of mortgage, are X amount, but I've got to pay the pilots how much money?" Because when there's a shortage of anything in any supply and demand market, the value of that commodity increases dramatically. And certainly we're seeing the pilots that are around in the business aviation, private jet world, their value has gone up exponentially. I mean, that is now a secondary issue to the market, that if supply improves very quickly, we've actually set the bench as to what a pilot is going to be able to charge for his work, and now we've increased the cost of our workforce. But it does need to increase, because it can be, it is just two human beings that you need at whatever you pay them per year to make the aeroplane fly. And without that, a larger aircraft, certainly the values don't really work to stop it working. How we get more people to be pilots, I don't know. There's a lot of work that is done to try and attract more people into the industry, but we can sing and dance about how great it is, and we'd like more ladies to come and fly aeroplanes, etc. But if the money isn't there to do the training, then we're not going to be able to. And I think the only way that we can get over that is perhaps some funds set up by the OEMs, as well as some of the airlines all clubbing together and setting up a separately managed fund to help people that have the ability but don't have the money to become pilots. I think that money could be paid back fairly easily, and that's about the only way I can think of really pushing the volume of people through that we need to fly the modern aircraft fleet that we have.
I mean, you mentioned OEMs putting money into a fund. I mean, the EBAA, which represents our industry, is sitting on a lot of money. Perhaps you'd like to spend some of it. I mean, who from the EBAA is here today?
Bruce has just gone, I think.
Oh, he's just gone.
I've been sort of figuring out hand at the back.
You know, I mean, maybe some of the reserves that have been held there could be put into pilot shortages in terms of marketing or actually funding individuals.
Okay, controversial.
Well, I believe they're sitting on 12 or 15 million euros.
Okay. This is just Brexit. They're kicking. We're meant to be making friends with Europe now. Anne, you know, as Dassault makes amazing aircraft, how quickly will you get rid of pilots?
Quick. Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know if it's just a Dassault issue, if it's, you know, but so far it's been okay.
It's coming. Okay, questions from the audience. Does anyone in the audience want to use an old-fashioned microphone? Well, they're not old-fashioned, they're cutting edge, but does anyone want to use a cutting-edge microphone to ask a question? Okay. Let's go. Would it not be useful to have a panel of young people feeding back to us? I think that's offensive.
Definitely.
And I think we're just going to delete that one. It's young at heart. Patrick Margetson-Rushmore's heart is very young, if he has one.
How do you trace those?
We can't trace these, I promise. What can our industry trade associations do? This is not for Patrick. What can our industry trade associations do more effectively to justify, explain business aviation? Aoife?
Actually, there is an awful lot we can do, and we're working on it. EBAA, our friends in Europe, did spend an awful lot of money on exactly this. We're doing it at BBGA. What it is, I think, is it needs to be less flowery language about we're all brilliant and more down to, you know, these are the people we employ. When we employ them, this is the course of their future potential in that employment. You know, they come in at ground level. These are fantastic skills that you can learn at every level of aerospace. We can work with our own industry. I mean, I don't know how many of you in the room, but I have been shocked by some of the regulators and their just obvious lack of understanding of business aviation and how it compares to the airline industry. Same with the tax guys. You know, you're not an airline. Well, yes, we are an airline. We've got an AOC. We operate aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. Or even with the regulators, you know, well, why are you so different? Well, the person who owns the aircraft isn't the person who manages, operates it, maintains it. It's, you know, it's a totally different industry. So it depends on who you're talking to. But we do need to work on the message. I think there needs to be a decent working group with representation across the industry. And you know, get the best out of this room and get the best information back out there. But you're not going to meet these people with glossy brochures and, you know, pretty aircraft and pretty girls. You're not going to target it like that. That just feeds their whole perception.
I mean, I agree with Aoife. I mean, we just have to keep plugging away.
Another question. Why aren't we explaining the economic output of business aviation and the number of jobs it creates and supports? Philippe, I would, adding to that, it's not actually, you know, there are industries that, when you do that, there are industries that, you know, like fishing has a very low contribution to GDP, but it's very easy to understand. And so people understand, you know, the fishing lobby is very, very strong, and we're going to be seeing a lot of it in the negotiations. What can business aviation do to actually get the statistics out there? And also, how does that work?
Well, I think, again, I go back to the case of Switzerland. I think you have a local section of EBA there that is active and explaining to people that indeed, if you look the amount of jobs created, that's the key factor. Because I think anybody realize, okay, this is 20,000 jobs, this is 30,000 jobs, this is 50,000 jobs. That's very important. One thing, I come back to the shortage of pilot. I think before you had absolutely no problem to find pilot ready to fly on long-range aircraft and going on a mission for 3 weeks. Now you will find most likely pilots who want to do roster, almost like an airline, and they don't want to go on a mission long time. So I think the difficulty is how to attract people for those different roster, or more difficult to manage than just a regular roster of airline. But for the perception of business aviation is really, really done. We need EBA to go out there and to say in each country, okay, this is the figures, this is what we have, and maybe go even to the level of school sometimes to see if we can attract more pilots to the industry.
Yeah, just also when we communicate, we very often use the same channel. So we keep on talking to people from the industry, and industry people are like, oh, okay, I know this is, you know. So I think maybe we need to think of other channel to talk to the public that has that opinion. Because right now we're talking amongst ourselves and we all agree, and then we'll talk to other industries and we'll all agree. But when we want to talk to the people who are attacking business aviation, it's not people within the business aviation, it's people outside of that world, and you need to find, you know, other channel to address that to them directly.
Also, a question for you, Anne. It's not just about the environment. What about corporate social responsibility? You know, you're a listed company.
Yeah, no, and that's why I was mentioning before that we need to communicate on all phases of the life cycle of an aircraft. And we, for instance, at Dassault, and we have, you know, very long list of what we've been doing in terms of how we reduce by 80% water waste when we produce the aircraft, what we do with aluminium waste. So not only on, we always try to put out there the most efficient aircraft, but also how we, as a corporate, you know, have to be greener just in the way we do our business.
Okay, we've got a question from Liz Moscott, right down the back. It's a race between the two microphones, and the one at the back's one.
Hello, thanks Al, thanks everyone. Liz Moscott with Gear Up TV. One of the issues with perception is the end user and some of the lack of transparency with the end users. I think it would be valuable to have some of these conversations and be a little bit more transparent with who's flying, and if people are more public about that, about the how much they're going to contribute to the environment, because I think that is one of the things that annoys the public. What is your response to that?
The root cause issue of the environmental impact of business aviation is the same as every other industry that has any kind of emissions. The facts and the science behind it all are yet to be proven. So we all talk about carbon emissions. The reality is carbon emissions are one of the contributors to radiative forcing. Radiative forcing is the way that the Earth absorbs long-range radiation, turns it around, sends it back out, and some of these gases are stopping those wavelengths going out. If you speak to a glaciologist up in Alaska, they will tell you about the glaciers are retreating due to global warming. If you then take them for a beer afterwards, they'll tell you that the glaciers are retreating due to global warming because global warming is a natural phenomenon. And what we don't know, because the Earth is a natural thing, how much we're accelerating it, potentially not accelerating it, but I think we probably are. So to look at the transparency of how much is being emitted is only one element of it. And we can say how much...
Thanks, Glen, and I appreciate that, and I entirely agree. What I mean, really, is people get jealous. It's always been that way. And I think if some of your end users would speak and they would talk about the great things that they're doing, which I agree with, I'm in this industry, for jobs, for how they're addressing some of this, I think that could go a long way to enhancing the reputation of business aviation with the general public. And I think it would be great if some of the operators or FBOs could take a little bit of a stand in encouraging that, not to demonize people, but to to be a bit more transparent about what business aviation is and why it's so useful, not just us as an industry.
Liz, we do have people who are doing that and are taking a public stance. NBAA has done a great job on it, in fact. But there's a ripple effect here, and until we sort ourselves out in terms of our own perception amongst the general public, they're not going to stick their head up because, frankly, they've enough to be doing without being on the front page of the Daily Mail and, how dare you take a flight to meet the 4 meetings obligation. So I think that there is a ripple effect. We need to take a handle on it for them to stand up and actually back us and say, yes, this is a fantastic industry. We need to lay the groundwork first so they don't get shot down the minute they do that. But they are out there, and there are proponents of business aviation. You're absolutely right. We need to encourage more of that.
I mean, do you think, therefore, we should be approaching governments, because all governments fly private jets, would be going to say to the governments, can you please own up and say how many hours you fly, why you fly privately, and what benefits you see it actually works out for your country? And that's maybe perhaps one of the areas we can look at.
Absolutely, but you can't do that until you start explaining the basics of here's what they did. Like one of my clients, Bombardier, did a review, and in terms of just the analysis of the time saving and the security for management, all of the review you would typically do, and it made for fascinating reading. So, now when we go into corporate presentations, so you get hauled in to stand up in front of literally a room full of shareholders, and they're all anti-corporate, they're all anti-everything, except for, when the share price goes up. And the first question is, how many of you think that the company should buy an aircraft? Everyone in the room. By the time you've done the presentation, breaking it down into hard brass tacks of this is the contribution to the shareholder value, this is what it's going to do for this business, these are the markets we can access, et cetera, now how many think we should buy an aircraft? And you'll get you won't get the full room, but you will get a much better percentage. So it's kind of what we're all saying here is our communication is all wrong, I personally think. And I think we need to take a stand as an industry. So, that's what we want to do at BBGA, and I know EBAA are doing it too.
Okay, let's go through some questions. One point, we need to quit talking to ourselves. That slightly ruins the conference. Why has CJI not invited regulators here for free and HMRC? That's a great idea. We did tell HMRC they could have 20% off if they paid cash, which has launched an investigation. Okay, the most popular question on there. BizAv is not the only industry continually under attack. What can we learn from other industries that face similar criticism? And someone else has just beautifully timed it, saying we could learn from the automotive industry. Their shows are more public, we celebrate ourselves, they present their products and industry to everybody, we to ourselves.
I think the problem is the automotive industry, practically in developed countries, most people own a car and will continue to own a car and have owned a car. And most people will not be owning an aircraft.
Anne?
I think we're still, talking a little bit about the same thing, but it's always we have a perception issue, and it's the fact that it's really a privilege to fly private. And as any privilege is, it gets attacked no matter what. So I think I go again to having the right communication is one thing, but the right channel is really something that matters. Because how do you talk to the public if it's just to conference where you only have biz aviation people? So it's really much hard to, you talk to these people. And again, as OEM, I'm sure we can do more also we always, advertise in trade shows and things like this. I think maybe if we were a bit broader to other media, then that could be useful as well.
It could be said that maybe the motor industry hasn't done quite such a good job. They put lots of effort into it, but they're all in fairly large decline. And I guess the other issue going full circle is if you're going to spend some time communicating with somebody, is it going to be communicating with someone who currently has an issue with your industry, which is going to smooth them? And let's be honest about it, they're either the voting public or shareholders. That's all that we care about. Because if the shareholders are happy, that's great. If the voting public are happy, then they're going to stick with the government that perhaps supports our activities. So to then have to spend money communicating to them to try and improve the image is much more expensive than actually spending money communicating with a customer who's going to buy your product. And that's, I think, where the biggest disparity falls to try and actually resolve any negative thoughts about the industry.
Philippe?
Well, I think the question was excellent because, for example, at eBay's, maybe I'm wrong in what I'm saying, but I think the entrance fee is something like $250, yeah? You're not going to get anybody from the public in Geneva coming to see you. If you put it at $50, you're going to get a lot of people coming. And there is a lot of people that would have interest from the public, for example, to come to eBay's. I think it'd be great. It's an opening as well to the people to get more about business aviation.
Okay, here's a nice positive one. Can climate change become an opportunity rather than a risk? The opportunity to change business jet's image as the first carbon-free means of long-range transportation. Aoife?
That's a fantastic idea. And, you know, coming back full circle, this is a wealthy industry. We have the people in it who can do the proper investigation and spend the cash and the time on doing this. So, absolutely, I think that's a great idea, whoever that was.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? Okay. I like the latest question, which I've just... Is there actually a problem? Is this actually hitting the bottom line? What's the real, actual, tangible negative impact on those in our industry?
Well, I guess it's... we recover most of our payments that we make out in carbon emissions by increased pricing, but not all of it. I suspect, though, we perhaps are going to lose the next generation of potential users of charterers because they see it as a bad method of travelling and communicating. So it's the opportunity cost that's really probably the issue.
But do you think it's actually hitting? Are you actually losing business because people don't want to own jets because of the perception or being seen to fly on them?
From my personal point of view in the UK, I don't think so. I don't think we're actually losing a lot of business. People are slightly wary. But people have a need, often do have a need. Some people say, well, why not just do everything on Skype or Teams video? It's completely different than being physically in the same room face to face. It is so different to be able to form a relationship.
But isn't this as well, though, something, you know, we're not talking about necessarily now. We're talking about the next generation. You know, these are the generation that don't want to buy houses because they don't want to commit, or they don't think they should commit. You know, they don't want to, technically they won't want to buy aircraft, but they'll still want to get to where they need to get to. And this is where the farce of it all comes in is, well, you know, how are you planning to get around if not in using aviation? So I think you've got to prepare for it. And I take the point, look, you know, we're bigging up a big issue that actually the figures show we're all doing perfectly fine. But I do think there's a sea change coming. You can see it already. That there is a move, just even my own experience with clients, you know, there is a preference to going charter. There's a preference to not showing that you own an aircraft. It's easier from a tax perspective if you charter. So you know, all of that is adding up. And I do think the industry needs to address it or get ready for the next wave and have the next product ready for when that happens.
Yeah, I think the Financial Times ran a small article about who were the first 5 environmentalists who were billionaires. And I think there were 3 Chinese people, Elon Musk and somebody else I can't remember. All of them own a private jet. And they've made their money by providing environmentally sound services and products.
Anne?
Yeah, well, I think we're being attacked as an industry also, because our customer are being attacked. So we're attacked directly, and then indirectly our customer are. We get, for instance, as an OEM and I'm a salesperson, I'm getting more and more questions from my customer about how can I justify my emissions? Can you tell me exactly how much I'm going to emit from this to this point to this point? So they're being attacked also, and we need not only to defend ourselves almost, but defend them as well in how they use it. And I have to say, I've seen on several occasions, some customers that were like, well, I don't want to own an aircraft on my own. I'll increase my NetJet share, so I will continue to send CO2 emission in the world, but I don't want to be on the forefront of that battle. So.
Okay, final question, one-word answer. we've talked about how the industry feels it's under attack now, it's worse. This time next year, will things be better, worse, or the same?
I live in the UK, so a million times worse.
I think
Thank you, Brexit.
And I think it'll be the same.
So
Same.
worse, same.
I'm going to say better, because there's lots of opportunity with modern technology and things moving forward in terms of marketing and education and all the rest. So it's only going to get better.
I'm going to say same, because it takes time to change perception.
Going to come back to that word used many times, transparency. If we get the facts out and we have the figures out, then we'll be in a better position.
So better. So on that, thanks so much for those one-word answers. Brilliant. Thank you very much.